Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew, and welcome to Workshop 6 on Demographics and World Development. Just a little introduction activity for you. This is from a company called Gapminder, which uh, essentially the mission of this company is for people to mind the population gap. Now, I'll give you just a few minutes to answer these questions. I'll have you pause the video, go to this link here on the screen, and just answer these questions to see how aware of the world and the population gap you are. So continuing on, here are the results from a bunch of these Gapminder tests. So this is comparing human scores to chimpanzee scores. Now, if you're a chimpanzee, you're just clicking random buttons, right? So you're going to score around a third of the questions, right? But because of human biases, 80% of people scored worse than chimps, 10% scored at the level of chimps, and 10% scored better than chimps. So if you did pretty badly on that test, do not feel bad. There are a bunch of misconceptions about the world, which we'll go over now. Firstly, the world is divided between the rich and the poor. Secondly, the world is getting worse. And thirdly, world population is growing. Now, the reason that we have this misconception that the world is divided between rich and poor is because of some of the terms that we've been using for, a century at this point, like the West versus the East, industrialized countries versus industrializing countries, third world versus first world, core versus periphery, developed versus developing, and global north versus global south. This really gives the narrative that the world is divided in two. The world is divided between the rich and the poor. But this really is not the case. Most people are in the middle income bracket and live in middle income countries. So 26% of respondents answered that question correctly, which obviously you'd hope it's a little higher than that on a 3-option multiple choice question. But yeah, this really brings home the point that most people in the world live in middle income nations, and there's this huge misconception that low income nations have the most people. Another misconception that many people have about the world is that it's getting worse. And if you look at the news for, more than 2 seconds, you would think that, everything is going badly based on, various headlines that, we're going towards catastrophe. But the world is actually getting richer, more developed, and better over time. If you look at things like child cancer survival, girls in school, science, women's rights to vote, democracy, literacy, new music, everything is going up. And this is a testament to how the world has developed over, a few decades. And there's even more trends. Bad trends are going down. Oil spills, battle deaths, the death penalty, expensive solar panels, nuclear armaments. All of these trends are decreasing over time. And this is making the world better. Another question that you may have messed up on or, fallen into a trap on is in low-income countries across the world, how many girls complete 5th grade? It's 60%. And while that number should be higher, if you just took a look at the news, you would think it was closer to 20. And only 7% of respondents correctly answered this question. Now, you can watch this video on your own time. We will provide the workshop slides to you. But another misconception is that world population is continuing to grow. It's not. World population growth has begun to level out, and it has for about a decade at this point. And while world population just surpassed 8 billion in early 2023, it's slowing down, and the world is essentially reaching its carrying capacity. So, some important terminology that you need to know for demographics are birth rate, or crude birth rate, which is the number of live births per 1,000 people. Uh, High birth rates tend to be characteristic of developing countries. This is because people need to have a lot of kids because a lot of kids die, and uh, children are needed to, work for subsistence agriculture and so on. Death rate, or the crude death rate, is the number of deaths per thousand. And crude death rate isn't as relevant in today's world because healthcare has, caught up with various uh, curable diseases like, tuberculosis and so on, and less people are dying. Though, of course, there are problems with distribution of medicine to developing countries and so on. Lastly is the rate of natural increase, RNI or NIR, which is the natural population change, not including immigration and emigration. This is the birth rate minus the death rate over 10. And this just gives a general rate of how fast the population is growing. Now on to migration. Net migration rate, NMR, is the number of immigrants minus the number of emigrants over 1,000. The population growth rate is the RNI plus the NMR over 10. The fertility rate is the number of children per woman, usually between 15 and 45, as in 15 and 45 years of age, not children, obviously. Infant mortality rate is the number of infant deaths per live births. And replacement rate is the number of births required to keep population level. Usually, the replacement for fertility rate is 2.1. This is because obviously you need to have two kids, one to replace each parent, and the 0.1 comes from the infant mortality rate. However, this can vary from country to country. So, for example, if a country has a high infant mortality rate, it might be closer to 2.2 or 2.3. If it's a low infant mortality rate, it might be closer to 2. The dependency ratio is the ratio of youth and elderly over the labor force. So usually this is people age 0 to 14 and 65 plus over how many people are 15 to 65. So that's just a measure of essentially how many people the labor force is supporting. And if the dependency ratio is over 1, like it is in some highly developed countries, that can be a problem for things like taxation, healthcare, long-term care, and so on. So if we look at the demography of the world population, just through a population pyramid over the years, you can see men on one side, women on the other. The population pyramid in 1950 is more characteristic of a developing country, with a lot of people in the younger years, with people dying very quickly throughout the world, and less people living to higher ages like 70 or 80. But in 2100, it's projected to be more like a developed country's population pyramid, with many people living to older ages like 60, 70, 80, and so on, and even a large proportion living to over 90, like around 5-10 million people living over 90. And this, again, is just a testament to how much the world has developed in the last few decades, even.